Ali Prescott, 35 years old. I once believed that if I stayed quiet enough, kind enough, and useful enough, they would eventually need me. But then one day I received a family photo invitation, not to be included, but to complete the frame. You're the most stable one in the family. Signing this isn't asking too much. And I understood I wasn't someone they forgot. I was someone they remembered only when I was convenient, never when I was meant to be loved. I don't remember the last time someone looked me in the eye when mentioning my family. The message came just after I rinsed a spoon and set it down beside the sink. "You're not coming tonight. Aunt Darlene said you had a shift." I read it twice. Tyler Marchand wasn't one for punctuation, but this one had a period. Like something had already been decided, like it didn't require my response. There hadn't been a group text, no email thread, no vague mention of a thing this weekend that I could have missed between double shifts and reheated leftovers. Just Tyler's message hanging there short and final. I didn't reply. I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept my old phones, the graveyard of dead batteries and half-broken screens. The one from 3 years ago still lit up when plugged in. I held it while it booted like it might offer some version of the truth I could still accept. It didn't. Nothing on it. Just a blurry photo of my niece from Christmas 2 years ago, and a saved voicemail that began with Darlene's voice saying, "You know, Valora can't handle stress like you can." I opened social media. My hands didn't shake, but my thumb paused longer than necessary before tapping the app. The first photo was from Valora's account. The table was long candlelit, full of bowls and laughter. Mason jars wrapped in twine. Gold-rimmed plates that only came out for photographs. Valora wore cream. Darlene's lipstick matched the napkins. Everyone was there. Everyone but me. The caption read, "Family, the ones who show up always." I read it again. Not bitterly. Just slowly like a code. In the picture there was a space at the end of the table. A chair without a jacket. No plate in front of it. I don't know if it was meant for me or if they'd simply miscounted. It wasn't anger that arrived first. It was a kind of quiet logic. I was not invited, not forgotten, just removed. Cleanly, I checked my calendar as if the absence might be my own fault. But the date was blank, and my freezer still held the shepherd's pie I'd planned to bring to next time. I opened the filing drawer near my bed. I kept everything there, bank slips, maintenance receipts, mortgage documents tucked into sleeves with dates written in neat pen. I flipped to the envelope marked condo. The deed was still there. But the name on it was no longer mine. Valora's signature took up the second line. The first line where mine had always been was printed in soft grey. Crossed out, not erased. There was no note, no letter, just the replacement. I held the paper under the desk lamp, checking again for a legal stamp. It was there dated 3 weeks prior. Witnessed, notarized, all official, all without me. I thought about calling someone, not Darlene, not Valora, just someone. But I couldn't think of a single person who wouldn't either apologize on their behalf or try to explain it in terms of my own forgetfulness. "You probably missed the email. They thought you were working. You're always so distant anyway." I placed the paper down beside a chipped mug that still smelled faintly of burnt coffee. I'd left it on the radiator last night, half full, forgotten. This morning it had a ring at the base, dark, perfect, permanent. Darlene used to say nothing in this world stained faster than carelessness. I stared at the mug, then at the paper, then back to the mug. I picked up my phone again and opened the photo of Valora's dinner party. I zoomed in on her hands folded neatly beside a glass of wine. There it was. The ring I gave her 6 birthdays ago. A small stone, nothing dramatic. She had rolled her eyes at it when she unwrapped the box. I guess it's cute, for everyday wear. I'd saved 3 weeks for it. That night, I'd gone home and deleted the receipt from my inbox, like removing the proof would make the gift feel more like a choice and less like a favor. Now it sat on her finger, visible in the photo centered in the frame. The fridge hummed behind me. The walls were still. My coat still hung by the door untouched. My keys hadn't moved. And yet, the world I thought I was part of had already rearranged itself to continue without me. I returned the deed to the envelope and closed the drawer softly. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't write a message or post a reply, or even turn off my phone. I let it sit, face up on the counter screen, blank. I washed the coffee mug, dried it with the towel that had a tear near the corner seam, folded it edge to edge the way Darlene used to say linens deserved. Then I sat on the floor back against the cabinet. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything. I just sat looking at the name on the document, the one printed bold and sure. Not mine. And for the first time I didn't wonder if it had been a mistake. I just wondered how long it had taken them to practice signing it without me noticing. I used to believe that if I stayed soft enough, they wouldn't bruise around me. The first time Valora mentioned the blog, she didn't ask. She called it an opportunity for us, though. The US was mostly a placeholder. I transferred the money in 3 parts spread across 6 weeks so it wouldn't raise questions from my bank. I wrote miscellaneous gift in the memo line. The receipts are still folded inside a manila folder marked with her name in blue ink. I never removed it. I just stopped opening it. The blog never launched. Or maybe it did, and disappeared. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to be thanked. I just thought giving meant being included. Darlene once told me she'd handle my insurance enrollment, said it would streamline things. I let her. She had that voice people obeyed. It's just easier this way. You don't understand how messy these forms can get. I signed the line at the bottom without reading. She handed me a pen that still had the church's name on the side from some community fundraiser. Valora gets overwhelmed easily. You don't. That was the arrangement. I functioned, she felt. I simplified, she bloomed. If there was a debt, it lived in invisible margins. Valora's birthday always involved candles in glass jars and handwritten menus, even when money was tight. One year I cooked 3 full courses. Darlene arrived halfway through and placed a single store-bought cake on the counter without looking at the food. You always overdo it. People just want something simple. I didn't plan my own birthdays. There wasn't much point. The one time I suggested a small dinner, Valora had an event. Darlene offered to stop by after if there was anything left. Don't expect people to rearrange just because you're feeling sentimental. I remember folding napkins with soft pleats that year. I remember taking down the decorations before anyone saw them. When Valora missed the first repayment on the car note, I co-signed. She texted 4 words. Next month. Promise. Sorry. I didn't reply. The next time we spoke, I brought her a smoothie. I figured you were exhausted, I told her, placing it on the counter. She didn't look up from her phone. You always know what I need. It wasn't praise. It was a password. I left work late one Sunday and drove straight to Darlene's, still in scrubs. I hadn't planned to stay, just drop off her new reading glasses. I walked in quietly the way you do when you know your presence wasn't requested. Valora was already seated at the table, laughing at something Tyler said. The room paused when I stepped in. Darlene didn't meet my eye. "You didn't think to tell someone you'd be late." We waited. The glasses were still in my hand. I placed them on the side table beside a potted plant, whose leaves were always dusty. I worked a double. I didn't know there was anything happening. She adjusted her scarf, smoothed her collar. "We figured you'd make time if it mattered to you." Valora tilted her glass. She's always been a little distant. No offense. I smiled. The kind that doesn't touch anything. The quiet after a room absorbs words like that is heavier than silence. It's permission. I remember placing my coat back on the hook, even though I had barely taken it off. The sound of the zipper felt louder than anything anyone said. At some point, I began to expect the edits. My name missing from family emails. My presence unmentioned in stories told at church luncheons. "She's doing her thing," Darlene would say when asked about me. No elaboration, no specifics, just a line that ended before it had to explain. I once paid off Valora's phone bill 5 months in a row, not because she asked, just because I noticed the unpaid notices sitting in the recycling bin. She had left them on top like trophies. I was going to get to it. "You didn't have to play savior." I nodded. The phone lit up a minute later with a notification from a facial spa. I never said anything. It wasn't about repayment, or fairness, or boundaries. I thought back then that if I did enough of the small things, I'd become harder to exclude, like lint clinging to wool I'd hold. I once packed for Valora's trip to Palm Springs when she claimed she was too drained, rolled each dress the way she liked, slipped a note into the side pocket of her bag. "You'll shine. You always do." She never mentioned finding it. I didn't count any of this. I didn't keep a ledger. But when the omissions began stacking, when my name vanished from documents and my chair was absent from gatherings, something inside me stopped reaching forward. "There's a pair of shoes by my door, worn at the edges, laces frayed where they've been double-knotted too many times. I used to think I could outrun the distance they kept building between me and them. That if I just moved faster, spoke less, stayed helpful, they'd remember to keep me in the frame. They didn't. And maybe they were never planning to. I don't resent the dinners, the birthdays, the transfers. I don't need to relive them, but I remember where each gesture landed. On tables where my seat stayed empty. In inboxes never replied to. On bills paid with someone else's name in the signature box. I never wanted to disrupt anything. I only wanted not to disappear. And I did just slowly enough for no one to notice. I don't think people realize how absence can be practiced, how it begins in small, polite ways and becomes permanent by repetition. The Christmas card sat in the middle of the kitchen table, angled just so. I remember the red foil lettering and the scent of vanilla glue. It had been signed by every classmate, crowded names in slanted loops. I turned the card over twice before noticing the line in the center. "Thank you, Valora, for leading the choir." There was no mention of me. I had handed out the programs, printed them on our home printer with half the ink gone. Cut each edge with the decorative blade Darlene kept in the drawer labeled "Crafts, Seasonal." Valora said handing them out was the easy part. Darlene agreed. I was 10. I folded the card once and placed it back into the envelope without creasing it. At 14, I won second place in a regional essay competition. The topic was about resilience. I wrote, "About fixing a torn bedsheet without throwing it away, how stitches held more meaning than a perfect surface." Darlene picked me up from the ceremony in silence. Halfway home, she adjusted the rear-view mirror and spoke without turning. Your sister's the one with natural speech. You have to work harder, and it shows." The ribbon sat in my lap, curling inward. I pinned it to my bulletin board that evening, beside a photo of Valora from her pageant years. She had once told me she hated that photo. I left it there anyway, thinking maybe sharing the space might soften things. I applied to nursing school at 17. I remember the way my hands hovered over the keyboard before hitting submit. The application fee came from the jar I kept tucked under my bed. Rolled quarters tips from babysitting loose bills folded small enough to forget they were real. When the acceptance letter came, I handed it to Darlene over the breakfast counter. She held it between 2 fingers like it might smudge. "As long as you don't aim too high," she said, sipping lukewarm coffee from her chipped mug with the State Fair logo. She didn't ask to read the letter. She just slid it back and wiped her hands with a napkin. I filed that letter too. It's still in the same envelope. Valora once told me I was good at things no one notices, like restocking the fridge or remembering people's coffee orders. "You'd make a great assistant," she added, flipping through a magazine without looking up. I nodded, the way someone does when the room has no air left to disagree. Years later, during a rare family dinner, I arrived an hour late after a 16-hour shift. My I'd badge was still clipped to my jacket, the plastic lanyard creased where I'd twisted it during the drive. Tyler moved over to make space at the table, but Darlene waved him off. "It's fine. Let her stand a minute. You know, doctors save lives, but nurses just clock in." No one laughed, but no one corrected her either. I stood by the counter and poured myself half a glass of water. Valora had already started another story by then, something about a brand deal and a difficult client. I swallowed quietly and watched the condensation on the side of the glass trace downward. That evening when I returned home, I changed into a sweatshirt I'd owned since college. The sleeves had worn thin at the elbows. There was a coffee stain near the collar that had never fully come out. I kept it anyway. Some fabrics hold memory better than photographs. I thought about throwing it away once after Darlene held it up from the laundry basket and said, "This looks like something a person wears when they've stopped trying." I folded it and placed it back in my drawer. The deed to my condo sits folded on the kitchen table now. It's been there since the day I checked the records and saw my name replaced. I run my thumb along the fold each time I pass, like the paper might offer an answer if handled gently enough. It doesn't. The name that replaced mine is printed in bold serif font. Official, as if it was always meant to be there. As if I had simply been the placeholder. A temporary signature waiting to be overwritten. The drawer where I keep old photos has a habit of sticking. Inside there's a picture of me and Valora standing in front of the fireplace. I must have been 12. I remember that sweater, green with a high collar. Darlene said it made my neck look stiff. Valora is smiling in the photo. I'm not sure I was. I placed the photo back without sealing the envelope. None of these moments were big. No one shouted. No one slammed doors or cursed the heavens. They were quieter than that. Quieter than bruises. Just folds, edits, pauses long enough to exclude me without explanation. The paper on the table hasn't moved. Neither have I. I don't need to scream. I've spent years learning how to speak in silences. And tonight, sitting in this dim kitchen with only the hum of the fridge and the edge of a document that no longer belongs to me, I realize something simple. I didn't vanish. I just never fit the version of me they found worth keeping. Sometimes the deepest cut doesn't come from what they take, but from how quietly they sign your name to it. I noticed it by accident. A routine login to the old joint account, the one that was supposed to be used for household emergencies, though the definition of that had stretched with the years. The numbers didn't sit right. 3 large withdrawals identical in amount, processed on the same day of each month. The description read, Valora Revive Holdings. I refreshed the screen, closed the browser, reopened it. There was no mistake. 8,000 over 3 months, transferred out without a call, a heads up, even a post-it note with a half excuse. I called the bank. I gave the security code, the verification phrase, the last 4 digits of a card I barely used. The representative's voice was calm, steady. The authorized secondary on this account is listed as Darlene Marchand. The line didn't drop, but something in my chest did. I let her finish the compliance notice. I said, thank you. I wrote down the transaction IDs on the back of a grocery list in the margins, beside reminders for eggs and toothpaste. The next call was to the insurance provider. I'd only noticed the flag because of a message that my last lab work wasn't covered. Your policy status changed mid-cycle, the woman said. You're now listed under a dependent plan, registered to a primary policyholder named Darlene Marchand. I asked how that was possible. She said something about shared residential address, lack of recent verification, routine system updates. The kind of sentence built to avoid any real shape. Your coverage is limited, she added. But technically active, technically... I sat on the floor beside the heater index finger running along the chipped edge of the radiator. The ceramic mug on the table still held yesterday's tea, cold and translucent. I hadn't thrown it out. I watched a speck of dust settle on the surface. Then I dialed the number, the one saved as Marchand, home. Still capitalized, though the house no longer felt like a place that had walls I belonged to. It didn't ring long. Finally. I thought you'd call sooner. I didn't respond. There was nothing to clarify. Well, she said, if this is about the account, look, Valora's trying to build something. She needs stability right now. You've always managed. The silence must have felt too long for her liking, because she continued, why make it into a big deal? You've got your job, your routine, your sister's finally doing something productive. Let's not be selfish. I looked at the tea again. A small bubble had formed at the edge. You should be proud of her. She's using the resources around her. Resources. I thought you understood what it meant to support family. My hand didn't shake. I didn't yell. I didn't defend. I just ended the call. I printed the account records, each line in black ink, each withdrawal time-stamped. I stapled them to the page showing the ownership transfer of the condo. Same names, same dates, no signatures from me. I created a folder titled Notified. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. I just needed somewhere to put what no one else thought I should be consulted about. Later that evening, I found the old index card Darlene had once used to teach me how to write my name in cursive. The loops of the L, the soft curve of the E. Legibility means respect, she had said. Now, my name lived in documents I'd never seen under charges, I never agreed to, wrapped in a tone I wasn't invited to speak in. When Valora launched her website for the spa, she included a thank you note on the home page. Gratitude to the women who lifted me into this moment. There was a photo of her standing in front of white curtains, a clipboard in hand, her fingers barely touching the edge of a branded candle. In the corner was a decorative box, one I'd once gifted her, hand-painted with small blue dots. She never said she liked it. I wondered if she even knew where it came from. I flipped the envelope over and ran my thumb across the seal. The idea of consent had always been fragile in this family. Silent nods replaced contracts. Proximity was used as permission. The closeness of blood assumed agreement. I had nodded once too many times, not because I was afraid, not even because I believed them, but because saying no had always been treated like betrayal. Now I wasn't nodding. I pressed the printed pages flat with the back of a spoon. No folders left in my name, no signatures asked, no warnings given, not even the pretense of inclusion. I didn't lose something. They just stopped pretending I was supposed to have it in the first place. And I'm still not sure what struck harder, the money, the revoked agency, or the slow erosion of daughter into donor. Some choices don't need to be spoken. They just need to stop being undone. The form arrived in the mail without ceremony. A single page printed on recycled paper, creased slightly at one corner. There was a checkbox beside the line, "Remove from authorized contacts," a space for my signature. The return envelope didn't have a logo, just a barcode and a sticker that read, "Time sensitive." I signed it with a pen that had run dry before the final letter of my name. I didn't bother starting over. The manila folder Alma had given me lay on the desk, unopened for weeks. When I finally opened it, nothing surprised me. Just paperwork. Clean, technical, unemotional. Instructions on how to revise my medical directive. Sample language for removing a person's authority. A single post-it square and yellow clipped to the front. If you're ready, make it final. You don't have to explain. I kept the note. I changed my mailing address to a box in a neighboring town. Not far, not hidden, just elsewhere. A small shift in geography enough to make me harder to track by anyone who hadn't asked if I was staying. I closed the shared account. The teller wore thick-rimmed glasses and a cardigan with one button missing. She offered a hesitant smile and asked if I'd like to keep the joint access open just in case. It no longer serves its purpose. Her pen had blue ink. I used it even though I always preferred black. On the way home, I stopped by the pharmacy. I asked them to transfer all my prescriptions to a new location. The woman behind the counter didn't ask why. She just nodded and typed. When she confirmed my phone number, I gave her Alma's instead. At home, I gathered all the old insurance documents and clipped them together with a broken binder clip. The edges had curled from humidity. I didn't flatten them. I placed them in a drawer marked retired. My driver's license still listed Darlene as my emergency contact. I had used a nail file to scratch out the digits. The numbers were still faintly visible under the plastic, but the ink had lifted just enough to make the call harder. I didn't replace it with anyone else, just left the space blank. The hallway closet still held 3 of Valora's coats. One had a lipstick stain near the collar, the shape of a mouth I couldn't name. Another was a blazer she'd borrowed and never returned. I folded them gently, not out of nostalgia, but because they were fabric. Fabric deserved to be folded. I placed them in a cardboard box lined with tissue from an old holiday gift set. I sealed the edges with a single strip of painter's tape, easy to remove, nothing permanent. I left the box on the porch. No label. No note. The next morning, I received an automated notification. My profile with the hospital had been updated. The message read, "Emergency contact removed. Please confirm next of kin." I clicked confirm without adding a new name. When the clerk at the medical office called to verify the directive, her voice was slow, careful. "Would you like to add anyone else to speak on your behalf?" "No, just me." She waited longer than necessary. I could hear keys clicking in the background. I imagined her hand hovering above the enter key, unsure. "You're all set." I returned the phone to the receiver. The cord wrapped around my wrist for a moment before falling back into place. The document itself sat on my desk. I printed it on heavier paper, something with tooth. Something that didn't curl at the edges. I placed it inside a plastic sleeve and filed it under a new tab, standing orders. Valora's jewelry dish had lived on my bathroom counter for 3 years. She left it after a weekend visit, said she didn't need it, then asked about it 6 months later as if I'd stolen it. The dish had once read, "Glow," but the L had chipped. Now it simply said, "Go." I traced the rim with one finger, then dropped a paperclip into it and moved it to the cabinet under the sink. I found Darlene's spare key taped to the inside of the linen drawer. The masking tape had yellowed. I peeled it free. It left behind a film that refused to come off with soap. I placed the key in a ceramic bowl and left it by the sink. I didn't run water over it. I didn't need to watch it disappear. Just seeing it alone was enough. At dusk, a message came through. Valora's tone was clipped. "You're being theatrical. This family doesn't operate on punishment." 20 minutes later, another buzzed through. "If you wanted to be a victim, you could have just said that instead of deleting us." I read both. Deleted both. Then I turned off notifications altogether. The next day I went through the kitchen drawers. I removed the labeled jar Valora had left behind, the one she used to keep matcha packets and vitamins she never took. It still had her handwriting on the side in gold marker self-care essentials. I emptied it, washed it, filled it with spare pens. I found one of Darlene's letters, unopened, resting behind a stack of utility bills. The envelope was pale blue. Her handwriting hadn't changed in decades, still precise, still slanted, no return address. I placed it in the shredder, fed it slowly, let the teeth of the machine do what I never had the words for. The only thing I didn't remove was the tin Alma gave me years ago. Chamomile tea, still sealed. The label faded, the lid slightly warped. She had handed it to me during a snowstorm, her palm warm even through the paper bag. "You'll know when it's time." I didn't open it. I moved it to the top shelf. The apartment was quieter now, not because no one called, but because I no longer kept my phone where I could hear it ring. I cleaned without rushing. I folded linens without thinking of who they'd once been for. I packed away the extras, the duplicates, the things that never fit right, but had been kept just in case. There was no speech to deliver, no final text to compose. I didn't write a note explaining boundaries. I didn't request acknowledgement. I just stopped. The final thing I removed was the framed print in the hallway. It had been a gift from Darlene on my 25th birthday. A watercolor of a tree with the words, "Family is forever," etched beneath the roots. I hadn't noticed until recently that my name had never been written on any of the branches. I took it down, replaced it with a blank canvas. I didn't paint anything on it. I just liked the way it looked, quiet, clean, possible. I didn't need an apology, not because I had moved on, but because I had moved out of reach. I just needed the echo to stop. And now, I could hear myself think again. I didn't realize how loud the absence of correction could feel until it stopped echoing. The apartment had uneven floors and a stain on the wall shaped like a question mark. The kitchen light flickered when I used the toaster. The window screens bent inward slightly, and the floorboards creaked under even my softest steps. Still, nothing leaned in to say, "You should fix that," before someone notices. The day I moved in, I unpacked slowly. Not out of fatigue but deliberation. A chipped plate, a stack of towels that didn't match, a set of teacups with one missing its handle. I lined them up anyway. Alma arrived just after noon with a grey wool blanket, a box of loose chamomile, and 2 porcelain mugs wrapped in newspaper. One had a chip. One didn't. She handed them to me without a word and placed the blanket on the back of the chair nearest the window. "This is the first space that belongs only to you." I nodded. She didn't need me to say more. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from fear, just the sudden stillness. I was used to the layered sounds of someone else's life, Valora's voice rising at the end of a phone call, Darlene's slippers dragging across the linoleum floor, the distant ping of another message I was meant to answer quickly. Instead, there was the tick of the thermostat, the faint hum of traffic 3 blocks away, the refrigerator groaning like it remembered something. I stood in the doorway and stared at the wall where the paint had begun to peel, not in big swaths, just flaking edge by edge, like it had forgotten how to hold itself together. I traced the outline of a missing flake with my thumb. The cactus sat on the windowsill, short and squat, in a red ceramic pot. I had taken it without asking, a quiet theft from the corner of the old house. No one noticed it was gone. Valora once called it ugly. Darlene said it looked like something no one watered. It bloomed 2 weeks after I moved in. Just one flower, small, white, unapologetic. I watched it every morning for a week, half expecting it to close up or wither. It didn't. I drank my tea standing beside it, wrapped in the blanket Alma brought. I didn't scroll. I didn't answer anything. I didn't explain where I'd gone. There was no room in this place for performance. The first time I boiled water in the new kitchen, the kettle whistled sharp and sudden. I reached instinctively for the burner before remembering I was alone. No one else to call my name from another room. No one to remind me the stove was too high, the sink too wet, the tea too bitter. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had texture, like fabric left in sunlight too long worn warm, real. One afternoon I opened a drawer and found the scarf Darlene had given me 4 winters ago. Pale lavender, still soft, still smelled faintly of detergent. I folded it without thought and placed it in the closet, not out of nostalgia, just because it no longer carried weight. At night, I placed the photo of my father on the nightstand. He looked mid-laugh, head tilted slightly, a crease just starting to form between his eyebrows. I never asked where that picture came from. It had shown up in a box from Alma, tucked between 2 folded dish towels. I stared at it more than I meant to, not for answers. Just to remember that someone once looked at me like I was more than a placeholder. The cactus bloomed again the following week, this time with 2 flowers. I didn't tell anyone. It felt like something meant to be kept small. I bought a lamp from a thrift store down the street, yellow ceramic base shade slightly tilted. The woman behind the counter wrapped it in old newspaper. You don't need a bag. Looks like you've got steady hands. I carried it home cradled like something delicate, plugged it in, and left it on, even when I didn't need it, just to know I could choose the light for once. When the text came from Valora, short-clipped and vague, I didn't respond, just placed the phone screen down on the table and sipped slowly from the mug with the chip. The tea tasted slightly metallic. I drank it anyway. No one asked where I had gone. No one asked if I was okay. That somehow was the clearest answer of all. There were moments I missed noise, not their noise, but the illusion of presence. The hum of someone walking past, the sound of the front door opening just slightly before closing again. But then I'd hear the wind move against the window, the quiet shuffle of my own breath, and remember I hadn't been allowed stillness in years. The space didn't need to be beautiful. It just needed to be mine. I kept the blinds open even at night. I liked seeing the dark press against the glass, without trying to fill it with anything. I watered the cactus once every 8 days, as the little card tucked under its pot instructed. The flowers stayed open longer than they should have. No one else would have called it thriving, but I knew better. I hadn't lived a single day for myself until then. Not truly, not fully, not quietly. I still didn't know who I was becoming, but I knew I was no longer the version of me they remembered only when they needed something. And that was enough. For now. Recognition without care is just a transaction. The email came mid-morning. No greeting, no warmth. The subject line read, "Favor for family, urgent, but easy." I didn't open it right away. I recognized the sender. The preview line alone told me enough. "Can you co-sign the second loan package? Mom says you're the most stable one." No mention of where I'd gone. No acknowledgement of silence. Just a request posed like expectation wrapped in a compliment that wasn't really one. I deleted it without opening the attachment. The call came 2 days later. Darlene's name blinked on the screen, unchanged, uninvited. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. Then one more. When I finally played it, her voice was deliberate, clipped. "There's been talk, Ali. That post of yours, people are asking questions. Not about us, but about you. It reflects poorly. I suggest you take it down." She didn't name the post, just that post. The one I hadn't written, only shared. A link to an article on silent family estrangement. No commentary, no caption, no tagging. Only silence had followed. Until now. Another email arrived that evening. This one with a digital invitation attached. Family holiday photo. December 4th, studio reservation. Confirmed. There was a short note at the bottom. Full attendance looks better for the wall calendar. I stared at the sentence longer than I meant to, not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. There was no, "We missed you." No, "How have you been?" Just symmetry, optics, the need for an even number in the frame, a complete shape. I turned the invitation over in my hand, then folded it in half. The crease split the words "family photo" directly through the middle. I slid it into the fireplace and didn't light it. Just left it there like something that might burn later, but only if needed. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out the old frame that once held the last group photo we ever took. I remembered the day it was taken not because it was joyful, but because no one spoke to me after it. I'd smiled anyway. Out of habit. The frame was wood faux-stained, heavier than it looked. I turned the photograph around, hiding the image against the backing, then placed it back on the shelf, face toward the wall. The silence of it felt correct. A second message followed. "We're working on a new brochure for the spa. If you're willing to write a testimonial, it would help us get local traction." No punctuation at the end. Just trailing obligation. There was no space in those lines for the memory of a fractured skull. No breath held for apology. No pause long enough to ask, "Were you in pain? Did you survive us?" Only placeholders for what I could still provide. Name, reputation, a hint of participation that might soften their image. I replied to none of it. Not even to say no. The tea kettle rattled as it boiled the lid, lifting slightly from the pressure. I poured, without rushing. Let the steam rise, placed the chipped mug beside the cactus, and leaned into the quiet. The cactus bloomed again. A third time. 3 small white blossoms perfectly spaced. Not because someone asked it to, just because it could. I received one more envelope the following week. A folded letter from a distant cousin, handwritten on stationery that smelled faintly of artificial lavender. The note was short. "Valora mentioned you've been unwell. We're doing a charity brunch, thought it might lift your spirits to be around family again." There was no signature, just the initials MC and a postscript. Let me know if you want to say a few words. You've always been good with words. I didn't reply. The words I'd once given so freely now lived in silence. I didn't need to spend them explaining the shape of what they broke. The quiet that followed was the kind I could trust. I opened the closet that afternoon to organize the top shelf. The family album sat crooked behind a stack of old towels. I hadn't touched it since the move. Dust clung to the edges. Inside a photo slid loose from the plastic sleeve. I recognized it instantly, me age 11. Valora with her arms crossed. Darlene in the background, adjusting someone else's collar. I flipped it over. Blank. No note, no year, no message. I returned it to its place, but backward this time. Image against paper. Hidden, not erased, just no longer on display. When the call came that night, I let it ring. The voicemail was curt. We've sent over the spa launch materials. If you're not interested, at least let us know so we can move forward without you. I deleted it before it finished playing. I sat down and lit the candle Alma had left behind. Lavender and sage. The wax crackled softly. I placed the ceramic lid beside it upside down. A small gesture, but mine. The frame on the shelf stayed turned to the wall, and I didn't miss the faces it used to show. They hadn't returned for me. Only for what my presence might polish. And I had already stopped shining for them. There's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It just no longer asks permission. The mornings come earlier now, not because of an alarm, but because I've stopped pressing snooze on myself. I boil water before the sun hits the window, fold the dish towel, even when no one's watching, write dates in the margin of a cheap spiral notebook I bought with a coupon. The work I do isn't dramatic. I sort brochures at the Women's Resource Center. I refill the tea canisters. I carry boxes of toiletries to a corner shelf and make sure they're lined label forward. I speak less than I used to. Most people there do. One afternoon while I was restocking a basket of journals by the entryway, a young woman hovered nearby, hair pulled into a loose bun, nervous fingers picking at the cuff of her hoodie. She glanced over and whispered soft enough it could have been imagined. "How did you get out?" I didn't pause. I stopped asking if I could. She didn't nod, didn't say, "Thank you." But she stayed a little longer in the room that day, sat near the tea kettle, wrote something in one of the journals, and tore the page out before leaving. That was enough. Alma visited last Sunday with a paper bag of oranges, a bundle of thyme, and a scarf she'd been knitting since early winter. Indigo blue soft, but with weight. She held it up and laid it across my shoulders without ceremony. "You're not as cold as you were." I didn't correct her. The apartment still had drafts, but I knew what she meant. Later that week, I repaired the window myself. I watched a few tutorial videos, bought the sealant measured twice before I cut. My fingers were clumsy. I dropped the screwdriver twice, but I didn't call anyone. Not Alma, not the super, not anyone. When the latch clicked back into place, I didn't celebrate. I just pressed my hand to the frame and let the stillness settle around it. The cactus had grown another arm. It wasn't large, not yet, just a thin extension leaning slightly to the right, as if reaching without asking for permission. I stood beside it for a while and finally gave it a name. Quiet. I placed a note beneath the pot, just a torn slip from the corner of a grocery list. Let what survives be what was never supposed to. Valora sent a message 2 days ago. No preamble. No memory. Did you file taxes yet? I need your info for something. No question mark. No punctuation at all. I didn't respond. Just archived the thread and made a pot of green tea with too much honey. The mug warmed my hands, but not out of need, only preference. The photo frame on the shelf remained turned toward the wall. I hadn't moved it in weeks, not because I forgot it was an act of remembering inverted. I've stopped narrating things for their benefit. There's no longer a mental rehearsal of what I might say if they came back, if they apologized, if they cried. That performance has closed. One afternoon, while folding flyers in the back room, I overheard a volunteer on the phone. She spoke in a low voice, soft but clipped. "No, I won't come to dinner. You're not going to pretend it didn't happen." She didn't raise her tone, didn't cry, just ended the call and kept folding next to me like the sentence hadn't fractured anything. That kind of refusal stays with you. I carried it home in my coat pocket like lint or something found between couch cushions. I stitched the tear in my winter gloves that evening, the one that had been there since last year. I didn't do it to preserve anything. I just didn't want to keep pretending it was minor. The gloves fit better after that. One morning, Alma left a note under the cactus pot. 3 words written in blue ink. Still here. I didn't need a reply. Some things hold without confirmation. The air in the apartment smells faintly of time now. I keep a sprig in the kitchen, even though it dries too fast. I like the way it looks brittle without breaking. Maya, the woman from the center, left a small card on my desk 2 days ago. No envelope, just an index card with a drawing of a window and the words, "This helped me." No signature. I tucked it between the pages of my notebook, not to remember her, to remember myself. The strength I've found isn't armor. It's breath. Measured, patient enough, I don't check for messages anymore. Not out of defiance, just disinterest. They haven't found a new way to reach me, and I've stopped leaving doors unlocked just in case. The apartment isn't large, but everything inside it is chosen. Not inherited, not tolerated, chosen. Even the silence, especially the silence. I no longer need a wall to block them. They simply have nowhere left to enter. Some silences are not pauses. They are decisions. I sat at the desk for an hour before writing anything. The pen never left my hand, though the paper remained empty. I watched the light on the floor shift across the grain of the wood, slow as breath. There was no ceremony, no rush. Only the certainty that I would not go back. The envelope sat to my right, already addressed. Inside were the documents Alma helped me collect, the legal revocations, the transfer of authority, the name change petition. Everything printed on thick white paper that didn't fold easily, as if refusing to bend, was part of the point. Alma had offered to go with me, but I told her no. I needed the sound of my own footsteps this time. At the legal office, the clerk looked up briefly, the kind of glance reserved for someone whose name isn't known, but whose role is expected. I handed her the documents one at a time. First, the revocation of medical power of attorney, a simple form. My mother's name lined through, Alma's name spelled carefully. Second, the affidavit declaring no contact. It listed Darlene and Valora Marchand in full with dates. The woman didn't comment. She simply stamped the corner. Third, the notarized letter disowning any shared legal obligations or familial representation. It began with the words, "I release myself from the narrative others have written in my name." The clerk nodded once. No questions. The name change form took longer. I'd practiced the letters in my mind all week. Prescott. My father's mother's maiden name. A quiet name. One that felt untouched by all that had passed. Why the change, the clerk asked flatly. I handed over the sealed note. It read, I am not abandoning history. I am stepping out of its shadow. I am not running. I am arriving. This name is mine because I've earned the right to choose it. She stapled the note without reading aloud, just a flick of her fingers, a practiced motion. As I walked out, I passed a child holding their parent's hand, repeating their full name aloud, like it was a song. First name, middle, last. I didn't look back, but I remembered doing that once in the kitchen, with Valora rolling her eyes. That's too many syllables. Just go by Al. No one cares about the rest. That day I stopped writing my full name on school papers. Outside, the wind carried a scent like dry leaves and distant rain. I didn't rush. I took the long way to the courthouse, 3 blocks out of my way, just to walk by the park where I used to sit on my lunch breaks when the hospital shifts ran too long. A bench near the willow tree still bore initials carved years ago, AM+. The second initial had never been finished. At the courthouse, I submitted the petition to finalize the name change. A legal assistant walked me through it quickly. No emotion. She didn't ask about the old name, only whether the new one had been used anywhere else. I nodded. Quietly, not in legal documents, but in my own mouth when I spoke to myself in the mirror. That night, I gathered the final pieces, a chipped figurine from childhood, a knitted scarf I hadn't worn in years, a silver pendant from a graduation gift I never remembered opening. I wrapped them in plain cloth and packed them into a box. At the bottom, it placed a printed photograph, a copy of one that had once sat in our family's front hallway, a holiday photo where I stood at the edge, cropped by the frame, half a shoulder and an awkward smile. On the back, I wrote, I existed in the corners. But corners are still part of the room. No return address, no card. I left it at the nearest post office with exact change and a name scribbled in permanent ink, Valora Marchand. At home, I pulled the album from the drawer. I had scanned each page 2 weeks before, labeled the files with dates just in case memory ever blurred. Not for nostalgia, for record-keeping. Each photo that included me eyes down half-turned, sometimes even blurred, told a story louder than the ones people usually frame. I fed them into the fireball, not all at once. One by one, watching the corners curl, the ink fade. The fire didn't crackle or roar, it simply consumed, with respect. The last image was from a birthday long ago. Candles, half-lit cake, barely touched. Valora in the center, Darlene to her right. I stood behind them, barely visible between elbows. There was no room at the table that day, but they let me hold the knife to cut the cake, just for the photo. I placed that one in last. The smoke lifted softly. It didn't sting. I left the window open anyway. I walked to the shelf and lifted the old frame, the one that had faced the wall since I moved in. Dust covered the corners. I wiped it clean with the hem of my sweater, slid the photo out carefully. In its place, I inserted a picture of me and my father. Just us. On a faded bench, sun behind us. He held a fishing pole. I held a thermos of coffee. Our hands not touching, but nearly. I set the frame upright. Not prominently, just clearly. Later that evening, Alma called. Her voice was even. I saw the petition finalized. Welcome! I didn't respond, just stayed quiet. That was enough. The mailbox held one final letter the next morning. From the family lawyer. A single sheet acknowledging that I had removed myself as a beneficiary from the family trust. There was no thank you, no apology, just confirmation. The envelope had a sticky note attached. You know this can't be undone. It wasn't signed. I slid the paper into a folder marked completed, placed it in a filing box under my bed. Then I brewed a cup of black tea. No sugar. Let it steep too long on purpose. The bitterness reminded me of the medicine I used to take as a child, swallowed with my eyes closed. I drank it slow. In the stillness, I wrote 3 lines on the back of the receipt from the courthouse. This is not the end of family. It is the end of believing I owed it to them. Some names are a wound, some names are a choice. I folded the slip and tucked it under the cactus pot. The plant had bloomed again, a single petal curled at the tip like it was listening. I didn't close the door on my family. I just built a house they can no longer enter because there are no doors left facing them. Some mornings feel like the beginning, even when nothing announces itself. I filled the kettle with water. I didn't have to share. The handle was warm from the touch of my hand alone. The window above the sink wore a faint outline of yesterday's rain, dried into pale streaks that caught the early light. No messages blinked on my phone. No reminders. No missed calls labelled Mum or Valora. I opened the cupboard. The grey porcelain cup sat where I left it, slightly chipped at the rim, but whole. I poured the water slowly, listening to the way it met the tea leaves. No interruptions, no need to rush. I waited until the water darkened just right, not by a timer, just instinct. The table held a book I'd pulled from Alma's shelf a month ago. Walden. Its spine was frayed and soft at the edges, like it had been read in silence many times. I opened to the marked page. A faint pencil line underlined the sentence, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately." I hadn't chosen that line. Someone before me had. But I kept it there. The cactus on the windowsill had grown again. 3 full arms, now one tipped with a red bud. The colour was muted, but real more rust than bloom. But it hadn't been there last week. I picked up my notebook, the one with the linen cover, and wrote 1 line beneath the date, first day with nothing to undo. I didn't mean court dates or conversations. I meant the quiet, the tea, the way my body didn't brace before walking into the kitchen. I didn't expect anyone to shout my name or accuse me of something I hadn't done. I didn't scan the room for Valora's voice or Darlene's sighs. I folded a letter I'd written to Alma the night before. Only 4 lines. "Today I am not afraid. And I didn't have to pretend I was fine. That counts for something." I slid it into the envelope and pressed a cherry blossom stamp to the corner. Outside, I dropped it into the metal mailbox, its door cold under my fingers. Marcus Harlan stood on the balcony next door, adjusting the cushions on his patio chair. He looked up, raised one hand, not high, just enough. I nodded. He didn't ask where I'd been. He never had. And I never had to explain who I was to him. I went back inside. The apartment smelled faintly of rosemary and soap. I had done laundry the night before and left the window open just enough. The scarf Alma gave me, deep indigo soft as air, lay on the arm of the chair. I didn't wear it anymore. It wasn't cold now, but I still folded it every morning, not as a ritual, just because it was mine. Once Darlene found a scarf like that in my room when I was 16. "Handmade?" she asked, holding it up like a wet rag. "Looks like something you'd find at a church sale." She left it on the floor. I folded this one slowly. No reason. Just habit. I didn't smooth out the creases too much. They didn't bother me. The sunlight shifted again. I moved my cup a little to the left, so the shadow stayed with it. There were papers on my desk forms from the center, a list of names for next week's wellness drive. I didn't rush to finish them. I liked knowing they were there. Tangible, simple, my handwriting among them. Sometimes women at the center asked why I still volunteered. "You're not one of us," one of them said once, laughing. "You're so composed." I handed her a mug of peppermint tea. I was quiet because no one listened when I made noise. That was all I said. She never asked again. The walls of this apartment didn't echo. I realized that last night when I hummed a line of an old song. Just one note. It didn't bounce back, it stayed where I placed it. That felt important. I hadn't heard Valora's voice in 6 weeks, not through a call, not on the street, not from someone else's mouth. There had been one email, a formality sent through the lawyer's office. A single sentence. "Please confirm receipt of revised trust documents." No greeting, no signature. I replied with a dot. Just one. The dot had power, I suppose. It meant I saw it. That was enough. This morning the clock ticked the way it always had, but I didn't measure time by it anymore. I measured by breath, by tea cooling, by cactus blooms. The last photo of me and my father sat quietly on the shelf. No frame, just clipped to a cardboard backing. We weren't smiling in it, but we weren't looking away either. He had his hands on his knees. I had mine on a book I didn't open. That was enough. A letter from the DMV arrived last week confirming my name change. The envelope had no flourish, no celebration, but the new ID card inside felt solid between my fingers. Prescott. No Marchand. I didn't shred the old one. I just placed it in the back of the drawer where I keep expired coupons and rubber bands that no longer stretch. That was yesterday. Today I wiped down the windowsill, trimming a dry edge from the cactus pot. The new bud hadn't opened yet, but it leaned toward the light. I wrote beside the date in my notebook, "Growth doesn't require witnesses." The kettle whistled faintly from the stove, even though I'd already made tea. I turned it off, not annoyed, just aware. The mail truck passed without stopping. I didn't expect anything, and that felt clean. I reached for the blue scarf once more, folded it edge to edge, corners aligned. I didn't wear it. I didn't press it to my chest. I just folded slowly, like closing a page I'd already read. Then I opened the window. The breeze moved gently enough to rustle the edge of the notebook on the table. I steadied it with one hand, picked up my cup with the other, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't think of who might need me to prove I had made it. I simply lived.